The Guangzhou orbital was a noisy place, and Yuna liked it that way. The constant hum of the engines, the hiss of the air vents, the distant clang of metal on metal, all these sounds wrapped around her like a blanket. They made her feel invisible. On a busy space station, being just another person in the crowd was the safest way to live. Yuna walked through the crowded main hallway, her hands deep in the pockets of her old blue coveralls. The suit had stains from oil and grease, but it was comfortable and it helped her blend in. All around her, different kinds of beings moved about their business. Tall, pale Zalarians in smooth silver robes glided past. Groups of rough-looking miners from other species argued near food stalls. A few other humans hurried by with their heads down, just like her. She had been living on the station for 6 months now. It wasn't home, but it was safe. Her job was in environmental systems, which meant she fixed air filters and temperature controls. It was perfect work for someone who wanted to stay unnoticed. When everything worked right, nobody remembered you existed. The only person she ever talked to was Min, a man who worked in logistics. He was always stressed about shipments being late or cargo going missing. They sometimes ate lunch together in the staff cafeteria. He would complain about his job and she would listen. It was a simple friendship and it worked for both of them. Today, something felt different on the station. There were more security guards everywhere. They stood at every corner in their sharp black uniforms, watching everyone who passed. Their leader, a serious man named Jean, stood near the main elevators. His eyes scanned the crowd like he was looking for trouble. Yuna made sure not to meet his gaze as she walked by. She saw Min rushing toward her, his face full of worry. "Yuna, have you heard the news?" "No," she said. "What's going on?" "Director Kai is having his big party tonight," Min said, lowering his voice. "The big unity banquet. Everything has to be perfect. Security is crazy right now. Jean has everyone on edge. One wrong move and you'll be cleaning toilets for a month." Director Kai was the Zalarian in charge of the whole station. He was proud and loved showing off. A successful party would make him look good to his bosses. A failed one would be a disaster for him. "Doesn't affect us," Yuna said with a shrug. "We just keep things running." "You'd be surprised," Min said. "He's taken half my team to put up decorations. And he sent back 3 shipments of tablecloths because he didn't like the color." Min shook his head. "I have to go find some special food for a Vril ambassador. I don't even know what a Vril eats." He hurried away into the crowd. Yuna continued on her way. She really believed what she'd said. The party didn't concern her. Her world was pipes and wires and machines. That world was safe. Her shift passed quietly. She fixed a broken sensor in an air filter and adjusted the temperature in one section of the station. Simple work. When her shift ended, she changed out of her coveralls and into her plain gray station clothes. She planned to go back to her small room, eat some food, and read. That was her routine and she liked it. She decided to take a shortcut through the upper-level walkway. It was usually quiet there, but tonight it was full of activity. Zalarian helpers in fancy robes rushed around, talking into their communication devices. Large, beautiful displays showing space nebulas were being set up. Yuna kept her head down and walked fast, staying close to the wall. She just wanted to get through. She was almost at the other end when a tall Zalarian man stepped right in front of her. He was looking at a small screen in his hands and frowning. "You," he said, still not looking up at her. "Finally. What took you so long?" Yuna stopped, confused. She looked behind her, but there was nobody else there. The man finally looked up. His large dark eyes blinked at her. He saw a human in simple clothes. He didn't see Yuna. He saw a worker. He pushed a large, heavy box into her arms. It was cold and smelled a little like rocks. It was a box of Zalarian food paste, the bland stuff they ate. "The new cafeteria worker," the man said, like it was obvious. "The food machine in Hall C is broken. It's making a mess. It will ruin everything. Fix it. Now." He tapped his screen. "I have 100 other things to do. Don't mess this up." Before Yuna could say anything, before she could say, "I'm not who you think I am," the man turned and walked away, already shouting orders at someone else. Yuna stood frozen, holding the heavy, cold box. Her heart felt heavy. This was trouble. This was exactly the kind of thing she tried to avoid. It meant attention. It was a problem that wasn't hers. Saying no to a Zalarian, even by mistake, could get her in serious trouble. She looked at the box in her arms. She looked toward the exit, her path to a quiet evening. Then she looked toward the entrance to Hall C. She could hear a machine making angry clicking sounds from inside. A war happened inside her. Every part of her wanted to put the box down and run, to disappear into the hallways and pretend this never happened. But making trouble now, with Director Kai's party about to start, would be worse. Security Chief Jean was probably watching everything. A human making a scene would draw his attention. She couldn't risk that. With a deep sigh, Yuna turned and walked into Hall C. The room was huge and filled with long tables. Zalarian officials stood in small groups, talking in soft voices. They glanced at her when she entered, then looked away. She was just staff. In the corner stood the food dispenser. It was a big, complicated machine with a clear tube running through it. Thick, beige paste was supposed to flow smoothly through the tube and onto plates. Instead, it was gurgling and spitting. A messy blob of paste had oozed onto the clean counter. Yuna put the heavy box down. She walked over to the machine, and her engineer's mind switched on. The worry faded away, replaced by calm focus. This was just another broken machine. She looked at the machine carefully. The problem was clear to her. A small sensor was out of place. It was telling the pump the tube was blocked when it wasn't. The pump would stop, then start again, causing the sputtering. There was probably a small clog too, but the sensor was the main issue. She took her multi-tool from her belt. It was a simple device every maintenance worker carried. She found the panel for the sensor and opened it. Her hands worked quickly and smoothly. She heard a conversation nearby. Director Kai himself was standing with some important-looking guests, very close to her. And the security system is the best in this part of space. Kai was saying, his voice full of pride. A pure Zalarian design. Can't be broken into. It watches every system, every hallway. Nothing happens on this station without me knowing. Yuna's fingers paused for a second. She looked at the messy wiring inside the machine. She thought about the station's bigger systems. She had seen the plans. She knew the main computer for that unbreakable security system had a big weakness. The backup power nodes were all connected to one source. If that source failed, even for a moment, the whole system would shut down. A child could get past that, she thought with a small, private smile. It was a lazy design, hidden behind fancy words and Zalarian pride. She pushed the thought away. Not her problem. Not her station. Not her fight. She fixed the sensor, cleared the small clog in the tube with a quick air burst from her tool, and closed the panel. She pressed the start button. The machine hummed to life. The paste began to flow smoothly and quietly through the clear tube, forming perfect portions on the plates. The job was done. It had taken her less than 2 minutes. Relieved, she turned to leave. Her part in this mess was over. She could slip away, and no one would remember the human woman who fixed the food machine. But as she turned, she found herself looking right at Director Kai. He had finished his conversation and was now looking at the working machine, then at her. His large dark eyes showed a little approval. "You there, human," he said. His voice was patronizing, like he was talking to a useful pet. "This station's maintenance is getting better." "Good." He nodded once, then turned back to look at the flowing paste. He had dismissed her completely. He saw a simple worker, pair of hands. He saw the new cafeteria employee. And in that moment, that was exactly what Yuna wanted him to see. She gave a small, quick nod and hurried out of the hall, her heart beating fast. Not from fear of the Zalarian director, but from the close call. She had almost been noticed. She had almost become someone. She disappeared back into the crowd on the main hallway, becoming invisible once more. The noise of the station welcomed her back. For now, she was safe. The quiet life could continue. She had stayed out of trouble. The heavy box of nutrient paste felt like a block of ice in Yuna's arms. both cold and incredibly heavy. It wasn't just the weight of the food, but the weight of the mistake. This was trouble. She stood frozen for a long moment in the busy promenade, a still point in a river of rushing Zalarian aides. Every instinct screamed at her to put the box down on the floor and walk away. Just leave. Her quiet evening, her simple meal, her safe anonymity, they were all waiting for her just beyond the hall. But then she looked toward the entrance of Hall C. From inside, she could hear the distinct, unhappy gurgle of the broken dispenser. It was a sound of mechanical distress, a problem waiting to be solved. And worse, she could feel the impatient eyes of the Zalarian officials inside. Making a scene now would be like shouting in a library. It would draw every single pair of eyes to her. Security Chief Jin's sharp gaze would surely follow. With a sigh that came from the very bottom of her soul, Yuna adjusted her grip on the cold box and walked into the banquet hall. The air in here was different. It was cooler and smelled strongly of the sharp Zalarian sanitizer and something else, something floral and alien. The room was vast, with high ceilings and long tables draped in shimmering silver cloth. Dozens of Zalarians stood in elegant groups, their melodic conversations creating a low hum. They were all dressed in fine, flowing robes that made Yuna feel very plain in her gray tunic and pants. She kept her eyes on the floor and moved quickly to the corner where the malfunctioning dispenser stood. It was a larger, more ornate model than the ones in the staff cafeteria, but the basic mechanics were the same. The clear tube that was supposed to show a smooth flow of beige paste was instead bubbling and jerking. A thick blob of the paste had oozed out onto the pristine counter, a messy insult to the perfect room. Yuna set the replacement box down with a soft thud. For a moment, she just looked at the machine. This was not her job. She fixed atmospheric processors and gravity calibration, not kitchen appliances. But her hands, which seemed to have a mind of their own when faced with a broken system, were already moving. The panic and frustration in her mind quieted, replaced by a calm, logical focus. This was just a puzzle. A simple one dot. She ran her eyes over the machine's housing. The primary intake valve was vibrating too much. The pressure sensor was probably misaligned. A simple clog had likely started it, but the sensor failure was causing the continuous sputtering. It was a 5-minute fix for anyone with basic training. It was a 30-second fix for her. She pulled her multi-tool from her belt. The familiar weight of it in her hand was comforting. She found the release catch for the front access panel and pressed it. The panel slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing the machine's internal workings. It was a tangle of wires, tubes, and pulsating light, but to Yuna, it was as clear as a roadmap as her fingers worked, deftly realigning a small, glowing sensor and clearing a tiny blockage in the output nozzle. She couldn't help but overhear the conversation happening just a few feet away. Director Kai was holding court, a group of important-looking guests hanging on his every word. And so I insisted on the finest Zalarian technology for our core systems. Kai was saying, his voice smooth and confident. Our security network, for instance, is a marvel. A fully integrated, autonomous system. It is, for all intents and purposes, unbreachable. It monitors life signs, energy signatures, and data traffic on every deck. Nothing happens on my station that I do not know about. Yuna's hands stilled for a fraction of a second. Her engineer's mind, always working, immediately pictured the station's central server schematics she had studied during a routine ventilation upgrade. The unbreachable network Kai was boasting about had a glaring, stupid flaw. The tertiary coupling nodes, which were supposed to provide backup power, were all routed through a single, outdated conduit in section G12. It was a single point of failure. A well-placed power surge or even a simple system overload in that section could trigger a cascading failure, forcing a full system reboot that would take minutes. It's a house of cards, she thought, a faint, cynical smile touching her lips. A child with a basic data slate could trick it. The Zalarians had built something beautiful and complex, but they had forgotten to reinforce the foundation. It was all show, no substance. She shook her head slightly, pushing the thought away. It was not her problem. Her only problem was this stupid food dispenser. She finished tightening the sensor housing, closed the access panel, and pressed the large, glowing activate button on the front of the machine. The angry gurgling stopped immediately. The machine let out a soft, healthy hum. The beige paste began to flow through the clear tube in a smooth, uninterrupted stream, portioning itself neatly onto the waiting plates. The crisis was over. The job was done. A wave of relief washed over her. She had navigated the trouble. She had fixed the problem without drawing any real attention to herself. She was just a worker who had done a simple task. She wiped her hands on her pants and turned to make her escape, eager to get back to the comforting noise of the main concourse. But as she turned, she found her path blocked. Director Kai was standing right there, looking past her at the now-functioning dispenser. His large, dark eyes held a glint of satisfaction. He looked at the smooth flow of paste. Then his gaze drifted down to Yuna. "You there, human," he said. His tone was not unkind, but it was dripping with condescension. It was the voice of a master praising a useful pet. "This station's maintenance is finally becoming adequate. It is good to see some competence." He gave a slight, dismissive nod, a clear sign that she was no longer needed in his sight. He then turned back to his guests, already beginning another story. He had not seen an engineer. He had not seen a person. He had seen a function, a pair of hands that had fixed a machine. He saw exactly what she wanted him to see. The new cafeteria employee. Yuna didn't wait for another second. She slipped away from the group, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. She moved quickly through the hall, out the door, and back into the bustling promenade. The moment she merged with the crowd, she felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The incident was over. She had stayed out of trouble. She walked faster now, wanting to put as much distance as possible between herself and Hall C. She thought about the quiet of her room, the book she was reading, the simple meal she would reheat. Her heart rate began to slow. The brief, unwanted spotlight was off her. She was invisible again. Just as she was about to reach the corridor that led to the residential sector, a familiar voice called out, "Yuna, there you are." It was Min. He was hurrying toward her, his face a mixture of relief and his usual stress. "I was looking for you. I heard there was some kind of fuss near the banquet hall. Something about the food dispensers. You didn't get pulled into that, did you?" Yuna looked at her friend. For a split second, she considered telling him the whole story. About the mistaken identity, the broken machine, the director's praise. But the habit of secrecy was too strong. Telling anyone, even kind, worried Min, was a risk. It was a story that could be repeated. A story that could make her memorable. "No," she said, her voice even and calm. "I was just on my way back. I didn't see anything." Min looked skeptical for a moment, but then he nodded, accepting her answer. "Good. Best to stay away from all that. Nothing but trouble." He sighed. "Well, I still have to find those vegan cakes. See you tomorrow for lunch." "Sure," Yuna said, offering him a small smile. "See you tomorrow." As Min rushed off again, Yuna continued toward her room. She had done it. She had told a small, necessary lie to protect her quiet life. She had fixed the problem and disappeared back into the shadows. The danger had passed. She was safe. For now, the quiet life could continue. She had stayed out of trouble. But as she walked, a tiny, nagging thought lingered in the back of her mind. It was the memory of Director Kai's arrogant voice describing his unbreachable security, and her own instant, certain knowledge of its weakness. She pushed the thought away again, harder this time. It was not her problem. It was not her fight. Yuna finally reached the quiet hallway that led to her small room. The noise of the promenade was behind her, replaced by the steady hum of the station's inner workings. She felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen. The incident with the food dispenser was over. She had handled it. She was safe. Her room was exactly as she had left it. Small, clean, and impersonal. A narrow bed was fixed to one wall, a small desk to the other. There were no pictures, no decorations. It was a place to sleep and nothing more. She took a packaged meal from her small storage unit and placed it in the heater. As it warmed, She sat at her desk and opened her data slate to the book she was reading. It was a history of early spaceflight, full of simple technical problems and solutions. It was comforting. Back in the banquet hall, the party was getting louder. Director Kai was enjoying himself, basking in the attention of his guests. He pointed out the fine details of the room, the quality of the food paste, the impeccable service. He felt his station was a perfect reflection of himself. Elegant, powerful, and secure. Chief Jean was not enjoying himself. He stood near a wall, his eyes constantly moving. He watched the guests, the staff, the doors. He did not like large gatherings. They were chaotic. They were unpredictable. He trusted his security system, but he trusted his own eyes more. His hand rested lightly on the communication device attached to his belt, ready for any problem in a dark sector of the station. Far from the glittering party, a problem was beginning. A small, unauthorized ship had docked using a fake cargo manifest. His crew was not here to trade. They were rivals of Director Kai, from a corporation that wanted to embarrass him and take his station. Their leader, a grim-faced man, gave a silent signal. The attack started not with weapons, but with code. A vicious, clever data worm was injected into the station's network through a secondary communication port. Its target was the very security system Director Kai had just been boasting about. In Yuna's room, the light flickered for a half-second. She looked up from her data slate. That was not normal. A moment later, a low, blaring alarm began to sound throughout the station. It was a sound Yuna had only ever heard in drills. A security breach. In the banquet hall, the beautiful nebula holograms flickered and died. The soft, ambient lighting flashed once, twice, and then turned a harsh, alarming red. The melodic conversations stopped, replaced by confused and worried murmurs. Director Kai looked around, his face a mask of shock and anger. Chief Jean was already speaking into his comm device. "Report. What is happening?" The response was garbled, full of static. "Sir, system failure. We're locked out. The doors." With a heavy, grinding sound, the main doors to the banquet hall slammed shut. Then the smaller service doors. A deep clunk echoed through the room as the magnetic locks engaged. They were trapped. Panic began to ripple through the crowd. The elegant Zolarians were not used to being trapped. Jean slammed his hand against the door controls. They were dead. His own security system had turned against him, following its protocol to lock down any area under threat, but now it wouldn't let him out. He tried to access the override commands on his data slate. The screen showed only an error message. Network unavailable. He was blind and caged in his own prison. Director Kai rushed to his side. "Jean, what is the meaning of this? Fix it. Now." "I can't, Director," Jean said, his voice tight. "The system is not responding. We are completely locked out." He felt a cold dread. The unbreachable system had been breached in the worst way possible. It had followed its programming so perfectly that it had now become a weapon against them. The guests were getting louder, their worried murmurs turning into frightened cries. The red light painted their pale faces in a bloody hue. The situation was slipping toward chaos. While everyone else was looking at the doors or arguing, Yuna was not in the hall. But her mind was already working. The flickering light, the specific sound of the alarm, it indicated a core system failure. And the lockdown of the banquet hall meant the security system had been compromised. She thought of the single power conduit in section G12. If that failed, the whole network would go down for a reboot. But this was different. The system was still running, it was just being controlled by someone else. This was a takeover. Back in the hall, Jean was trying to calm the crowd, but it was useless. He was a security chief who could not provide security. He felt a deep shame. He looked at the panicked faces and knew he had failed them. Then his eyes fell on the food dispenser, the one the human worker had fixed. It was still humming quietly, untouched by the chaos. Its small status light was glowing a steady green. It was on a different, non-essential power circuit. And right next to it, almost hidden in the wall, was a small, unassuming maintenance access port. It was a physical hardline connection to the station's primary data conduit. It was a backdoor. A way to talk to the station's brain without going through the compromised security network. It was a tiny chance. But it was the only one he could see. He just needed a way to access it. He needed a tool, and he needed someone who knew how to use it. His eyes scanned the room, looking for the human in the gray clothes, but she was gone. Yuna, in her room, was standing now. She could hear the shouts and alarms from the hallway. Her engineer's mind was racing, analyzing the problem against the map of the station she knew by heart. The attackers would have taken control of the main security server. But to do it this fast, they must have used the system's own automated protocols against it. They would have created a fake emergency that tricked the system into isolating itself, giving them time to plant their own commands. There was a way to fight back. A hardline connection. A direct link that bypassed all the wireless and main routing systems. If she could find one, she could send a purge command, a system-wide reset that would kick everyone out and reboot everything. It would cause chaos, but it would break the attacker's control. She thought about the banquet hall. She had just been there. She remembered the layout, and she remembered the maintenance port near the food dispenser. It was perfect, but she was here, and the hall was there, locked down and full of panicking VIPs. Going there meant running toward trouble. It meant getting involved. She looked at the door to her room. She could stay here. It was safe. The lockdown would eventually end one way or another. She could keep her head down and survive like she always did. But then she thought of Min. He was probably out there somewhere, scared. She thought of the arrogant but harmless Director Kai, and the stern Chief Jean who was just trying to do his job. This was their home. This was all they had. A feeling she had not felt in a long time stirred inside her. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about letting something bad happen when she knew she could help. She had spent so long hiding her skills, she had almost forgotten what they were for. With a new determination, she moved to her door. It was locked, but the manual release for internal doors was simple. She pried open a small panel next to the doorframe and pulled a lever. The door slid open with a hiss. The hallway outside was bathed in red light, empty for now. She stepped out. She was not going to her room anymore. She was going back to the banquet hall. She was going to find a way in. For the first time in years, Yuna was walking directly into trouble. The red emergency lights painted the hallway in a bloody glow. The blaring alarm was a physical pressure against Yuna's ears. She moved quickly, her soft shoes making no sound on the metal floor. She was not running, but her walk was fast and purposeful. Every part of her that usually screamed to hide was now quiet. A different, older part was in control. The part that solved problems. She knew she couldn't get in through the main doors of the banquet hall. They would be sealed tight. But a station like Gwangju Orbital was full of secrets. It was a maze of main corridors and service tunnels, of fancy rooms for important people and the dirty, functional spaces that kept them alive. She ducked into a narrow service corridor marked Environmental Maintenance. The air here was warmer and smelled of ozone and grease. This was her world. The pipes on the walls and the conduits in the ceiling were as familiar to her as the lines on her own hands. She followed a specific path, counting the access hatches until she found the one she needed. It was labeled C7 Utility. Inside, it was a tight squeeze. This was a crawl space for maintenance bots, not for people. But Yuna was slim and determined. She moved on her hands and knees through the dim space, the metal grating rough against her palms. She could feel the vibrations of the station's distress through the floor. After a few minutes, she reached another hatch. This one opened into a small storage closet that supplied the banquet hall service area. She eased the hatch open and slipped out into the dark closet. She could hear the chaos in the main hall clearly now. The raised, panicked voices of the Zolarians, the deep, commanding tone of Chief Jean trying to calm them, and the frustrated roar of Director Kai. She cracked the closet door open just enough to see out. The scene was one of pure fear. The Zolarian guests were huddled together, their elegant robes looking ridiculous in the scary red light. Director Kai was standing face to face with Chief Jean, his finger jabbing at the security chief's chest. "This is unacceptable." Kai shouted. "You're Unbreachable system has breached us. We are prisoners in my own hall. I am aware, Director, Jean said, his voice strained but controlled. His eyes were not on Kai. They were scanning the room, looking for anything, any tool, any way out. They passed over the dark closet, but saw nothing. Yuna's eyes went to the food dispenser. It was still quietly humming. And right there, next to it, was the maintenance access port. It was a simple, unassuming panel, but to her it was a door. It was her way in. But how could she get to it? The port was in plain view of everyone. If she just walked out, she would cause more panic. They would stop her, ask questions she didn't have time to answer. Then she saw her chance. Chief Jean, trying to get a better view of the room, stepped up onto a low platform near the dispenser. This put his back to the access port, and his large frame blocked the view for most of the guests. It was a small window of opportunity. Yuna didn't hesitate. She slipped out of the closet. She didn't run. She walked calmly and quietly, staying low, using the counter of the serving area as cover. She moved like a shadow, her gray clothes blending into the dimness. In seconds, she was at the access port, hidden behind Chief Jin's back. She pulled her multi-tool from her pocket. Her hands were steady. She pried the cover off the port. Inside was a standard data link interface. It was a direct, physical line to the station's central nervous system, completely separate from the wireless network the attackers had taken over. Now she needed a data slate. She looked around quickly. A Zalarian aide had abandoned one on a nearby table in his panic. She reached out, snatched it, and was back at the port in a single, fluid motion. She plugged the data slate into the port. The screen lit up. It asked for a security clearance. This was a problem. She didn't have one dot, but she knew systems. She knew that in an emergency, there were often backdoors, leftover codes from the builders, or simple overrides for situations just like this. She typed in a series of commands, bypassing the standard login. She accessed the root directory. Lines of code scrolled down the screen. It was the station's core programming. She saw the foreign code immediately. It was like an ugly weed in a neat garden. It had wrapped itself around the security protocols, telling them to lock everything down and not accept any new commands. Not even from Chief Jean. On the platform, Jean felt a change in the air. The panic was the same, but something was different. He could feel a presence behind him. He turned his head just slightly. Looking over his shoulder, he saw her. The human woman from before. The one he had assumed was a cafeteria worker. She was kneeling on the floor, a data slate plugged into the wall, her fingers flying across the screen. Her face was a mask of intense concentration. She wasn't panicking. She was working. He was so shocked he almost spoke. But he stopped himself. He saw what she was doing. She was in the system. She had found a way in when he, the chief of security, could not. He slowly, carefully, shifted his stance, making his body an even bigger shield between her and the rest of the room. He would deal with the questions later. Right now, he would protect this tiny, impossible chance. Yuna didn't see him. Her whole world was the code on the screen. The attacker's worm was clever, but it was also arrogant. It was so sure of its control that it hadn't protected itself from a direct, physical attack. She began writing a countercommand. It was a simple, brutal thing, a system-wide reset command. It would tell every single computer on the station to turn off and then back on again. It was the equivalent of rebooting the entire station. It would cause a moment of pure chaos. Lights, life support, gravity, everything would flicker. But it would also wipe the attacker's code clean. It was a risky move. If she did it wrong, she could cause permanent damage. But she was sure. Her fingers typed the final sequence. Just as she was about to press the command to execute, a voice cut through the noise. "Yuna! There you are." It was Min. He was at the sealed main doors, his face pressed against the small reinforced window. He had been looking for her ever since the alarm sounded, worried about his friend. He had seen her through the window, kneeling by the wall. He was so relieved he shouted without thinking. Every head in the room turned. Director Kai, the guests, they all stared at the human woman crouched by the wall with a data slate. Director Kai's eyes widened in confusion and then anger. You! What are you doing? Is this your doing? Chief Jean stepped forward, his hand raised. Director, wait. But it was too late. The moment was broken. The spell of secrecy was shattered. Yuna looked up from the screen, her eyes meeting Min's worried gaze through the window, then moving to Director Kai's furious face, and finally landing on Chief Jin's intense, unreadable expression. She had been discovered. There was no more hiding. In that second, with all eyes upon her, she made a decision. Her thumb came down hard on the data slate screen. She pressed execute. The moment Yuna's finger touched the screen, the entire station seemed to take a deep breath and then die. The harsh red lights vanished, plunging the banquet hall into absolute, terrifying blackness. The blaring alarm was cut off mid-wail, leaving a silence that was somehow louder than the noise. The gentle hum of the air recyclers stopped. The only sounds were the gasps and frightened cries of the Zolarians. For 3 long seconds, there was nothing. No light, no sound, no power. It was as if the Guangzhou orbital had ceased to exist. Then, with a slow, groaning rumble, life returned. The emergency lights flickered back on, but they were a calm, steady white. The main lights followed, flooding the hall with their normal bright glow. The air systems started with a hiss and a cough. On the other side of the hall, there was a heavy clunk, and then the main doors smoothly slid open. The lockdown was over to end the sudden silence. The Zolarians looked around, confused and shaken. Director Kai blinked in the bright light, his anger replaced by pure bewilderment. He looked at the open doors, then back at the human woman still kneeling by the wall. Chief Jean was the first to move. He didn't look at the open doors. He didn't check his comms. He took 2 long strides and stood over Yuna. His face was like stone, but his eyes were burning with a fierce, intense light. He wasn't looking at a cafeteria worker anymore. You, he said, his voice low and hard. Explain. Now. Before Yuna could even try to form a word, Min came rushing through the now open doors. He ran straight to Yuna, his face full of panic and relief. Yuna, are you okay? What happened? I saw you there and I called out and then everything went dark. He turned to Chief Jean, instinctively putting himself between his friend and the security chief. Chief, please, I can explain. This is Yuna. She works in environmental systems. She's one of our best engineers. She must have been trying to help. The word engineer hung in the air. Director Kai heard it. His confused expression shifted. He looked from Min's worried face to Yuna's calm one, to the data slate still in her hand, and then to the open access port on the wall. The pieces clicked together in his mind. The cafeteria employee who fixed the food dispenser. The woman lurking by the maintenance port during a crisis. The total system failure followed by a perfect reboot. He wasn't a stupid man, just a proud one. And the truth was now impossible to ignore. He walked over, pushing past his stunned guests. He stared down at Yuna. You, he said, his voice much quieter than before. You did this? You rebooted my station? Yuna slowly got to her feet. She felt tired. The rush of action was gone, and now she had to face the consequences. The quiet life was over. She met the director's gaze and gave a single, small nod. The system was compromised, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. A reboot was the only way to clear the hostile code. It was a risk, but it was the fastest solution. Just then, one of Jin's security officers ran into the hall, his face excited. Chief, the attack is over. Our systems are back online. We've identified the breach point, a fake ship in Docking Bay 4. The intruder systems crashed when we did. We have them contained. The room was utterly silent. Every Zolarian was listening. They had all witnessed it. The human woman had done what their own superior technology and their security chief could not. She had saved the gala. She had saved the station. Director Kai's face went through a strange series of emotions. Shock, embarrassment, and then, finally, a dawning, pragmatic respect. He cleared his throat. It seems, he announced to the room, his voice regaining some of its old authority, that our station's maintenance is more than adequate. He looked at Yuna. You have performed a great service. There will be a reward, a bonus, and a public commendation. This was her moment to slip back into the shadows, to take the credit, accept the reward, and become a minor hero. But she knew it wouldn't work. The secret was out. No, Yuna said, her voice firm. Kai blinked. No. No, thank you, she said. I don't want a bonus, and I don't want a commendation. It was a lucky guess. Anyone could have done it. Chief Jean let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a dry, unexpected sound. That was not a lucky guess, he said, his eyes locked on hers. That was a surgical strike. You understood their code better than they did. You rerouted primary command functions through a nutritional dispenser's auxiliary processor to stabilize the reboot. I saw the logs. Who are you really? Yuna held his gaze. The fear was gone. She was tired of hiding. Someone, she said quietly, who wanted to be left alone. Jean nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. He saw it all now. The skill, the intelligence, the deliberate anonymity. On this station, he said, talent like yours is too valuable to leave alone. You have a choice. You can keep hiding in plain sight, pretending to be less than you are. Or you can use what you know to make sure an attack like this never happens again. The choice is yours. Yuna looked around the room. She saw the Zolarians looking at her not with disdain, but with awe. She saw Min, his mouth hanging open, looking at her like he had never seen her before. She saw the open doors, leading to the corridors where she had been invisible for so long. She had tried so hard to stay out of trouble, but trouble had found her. And in facing it, she had found a piece of herself she had buried long ago. She looked back at Chief Jean. What would I have to do? She asked. A small, rare smile touched Jin's lips. Your job, he said. But for real this time. Yuna took a deep breath. She thought about the quiet, lonely safety of her room. Then she thought about the feeling of her hands on the tools, her mind in the system, fixing a problem that mattered. The feeling of being useful. She nodded. Okay, she said. It was just one word, but it changed everything. She wasn't just Yuna the anonymous engineer anymore. She was the human who had outsmarted a corporate raid with a cafeteria tool. As she walked out of the banquet hall, the other human workers she passed looked at her with a new respect. Min fell into step beside her, buzzing with questions and pride. She had tried to stay out of trouble, but trouble had shaped her into someone new. Someone who was no longer afraid to be seen. And as she walked into the noisy, bustling corridors of the station, she realized that this new kind of trouble felt a lot like coming home.